to June's Community Environment and Partnerships meeting. A special welcome for some new members on the committee who haven't been here before. I look forward to bodies here and eager for the first meeting of the year, so that's good. Are there any declarations of interest? No, perfect. I would like to nominate Councillor John McKay, if he's willing. Can I have a seconder, please? Oh, loads. Thank you, Councillor Mullenny. I saw you here. Thank you, John. Proceedings, so I shall do that now. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, therefore if a fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located on the internet, so please switch off your phones or turn them on to silent. Thank you. Lovely. Does anyone have any comments of the...
Yes, thank you. I had some additional comments that I think it would be useful to minute. And I listened to out a copy of the notes that I wrote. Do I need to, shall I read them verbatim? Okay. One, it was confirmed that the community centre provision for each new development would be considered on a case-by-case basis, and the decision...
A committee happy to add that into the minutes?
The second point, 2.11, it was confirmed that the chip of a community centre and a policy for them to remain a tenant.
Nobody's objecting to that either.
Funding, because that type of funding was not always available.
Yep.
Two to go. 3.22. It was
lovely.
Okay, and the last one. It was confirmed that CEP will be consulted on future strengthening community.
We're happy for us to approve the minutes as an accurate record of last meeting. Perfect. Thank you. Lovely. We now have membership. Councillors Tomlin, Hussey and Carruthers have expressed their wish to carry on, and Councillor Tustain and Councillor does anybody on this committee wish to volunteer to fill those now, or should we send it back to group leaders to get them to fill in the places on a vaguely proportional basis, which is what we often do? Brilliant. We now have a referral from the council, which is to make the borough's roads safer for our residents. Request from the council and determine what they wish to do to kind of action it, and how we can progress the work as part of the work programme.
Thank you, Chair. Could I request that the Cabinet Member for Partnerships could write to the PCC to request how we can support them delivering this moving forward?
So request committee portfolio holder to deputize one of those Hampshire transport committees headed by Derek Miller.
So in terms of expressing the importance of it for the Police and Crime Commissioner by Councillor Vox writing a letter to them, but also to look at how we can work with Hampshire County Council solving these issues. Does anyone have any further suggestions? Councillor Lee?
That's right, yeah. I mean, in terms of point 3, could I suggest that officers or the council approach that they do in order to maybe bring it to full council at a later date to bring public services in-house?
So that would be an action for Hampshire County Council, because just the last point, which is about encouraging greater use of sustainable travel, walking and cycling. EPH look at the transport strategy every year, so I think we could probably request that EPH make sure they have a specific focus on questions. Brilliant. Okay, that is 3 concrete actions, which I think is good. Thank you, committee. So now we move on to our first substantive item, which is climate change.
We aren't the people that you should be expecting. Sadly, Hayley can't be with you, so you've got myself. And sadly, Mark Lambert is unable to join us as well, so I'm ably assisted by Sam, and what that really means is Sam will talk us through his update coming to this committee in November. So this is, in some respects, just an interim update that Sam will talk us through.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Bound, and good evening, everyone. So just quickly setting the scene, aware, as we've said, that there are a number of new councillors, so thought bit of merit in a very quick run-through background on the declaration of the climate emergency and the strategy. We're going to run through something that was raised at the last committee meeting, short period, about 3 months since we last came, but what have we done since? You know, where are we looking at in terms of our council emissions ahead of a fuller update in autumn, and what are we currently working on and proposing to work on? So just briefly, yeah, for those who weren't around, I'm sure this is familiar, but just in case, we declared the climate emergency as a council back in 2019, and there are a number of parts of that, but I guess the key headline aims were for us to be carbon neutral as a council, you know, how we operate by 22 very aspirational targets when you look around at peers as well. The climate change and air quality strategy itself was then adopted back in March 2021, it's just over a year ago, and the strategy sets out, as you might expect, the kind of key principles of our approach and 6 categories that we're focusing on. And alongside that, we have a more detailed action plan that actually sets out what we're looking to achieve. And we're reviewing that annually, and that's what we'll be bringing in autumn, is a kind of the full annual update of that that provides more details as opposed to this kind of interim update. The climate scorecards, yeah, something we mentioned last time, where we as a council scored quite favourably above average, and certainly compared to kind of other Hampshire authorities, albeit it's fair to say our overall score was quite modest. Essentially, this was a review of council action plans and strategies across the country, undertaken by a national charity. It's fair to say that those reviews were on strategies and plans as opposed to actual action. So there's a huge variety, and it's worth framing it was very much on that as opposed to what we've done. And as I think one of the councillors raised last time, you know, we're always looking therefore to see where we can improve. A lot of the improvements are kind of stylistic more than anything else, you know, it's around what you said, you know, how we said things. But there's certainly some key learning points that we've taken away and are looking to embed in our approach moving forward. So certainly, and we've always known a key part is improving our external engagement, making sure everything is accessible as possible. Making the most of co-benefits, and we'll touch on a few of those as we go through the slides, and there's other strategies coming later today that you know, touch on that around health and well-being, around air quality and other areas. Ensuring we're not just reducing the effects of climate change, but also adapting to future climate change. So unfortunately, some climate change is inevitable, how we're preparing for that, and linking to the ecological emergency, which I guess when the strategy was adopted wasn't yet in place, but the council has since declared. So that's more importantly, what have we been doing since we last saw you? So we spoke last time about proposals for EV charging, particularly looking at providing electric vehicle charging for residential areas where there's a lack of off-street parking, where homeowners potentially don't have driveways, etc. And we've been working closely with Hampshire County Council on this piece of work as the Highways Authority, and looking to identify potential locations and provide funding for that. And Hampshire County Council are imminently expected to put in a bid for government grant funding to supplement that work, which is great. And that will cover 40 different locations with towards 100 chargers spread out across the borough as well. A lot in the town, but actually across the borough as well. Work on our property asset base. So we've undertaken some assessments on our leisure facilities around measures we can look at to reduce carbon there. We're assessing those recommendations at the moment. We're also looking at our kind of wider operational portfolio, our wider group of buildings that we kind of own and inhabit as a council. And the property team are kind of finalising negotiations as we speak with potential contractors for that, to develop a timeline, to undertake some energy audits and establish a kind of decarbonisation plan for those. And also worth noting that we've completed our office consolidation. We're all now in the Dean's building, and the letting of Parklands is being completed. Our fleet of vehicles, we have a number of vehicles for our Community Safety Patrol Officer team that have now been ordered and are due to arrive very soon, replacing their existing petrol and diesel vehicles. And we touched briefly last time on something called HVO, an alternative fuel, and that trial's now begun on our fleet of mowers, and already some really positive results there. As I'll touch on later, looking to roll that out a bit wider. We've now launched the next round of a grant scheme to support low-income households living in inefficient properties to provide energy efficiency measures for them, and also trying to make this information as easily accessible as possible. As people know at the moment, it's high on the agenda with the energy crisis, among many other things. So trying to signpost available support to residents as best we can is really important. And then, kind of trying to engage and research further. Lots to do here, but we've been interacting with parish and town councils to try and we sent out a survey to try and understand what they're doing, if anything, already on climate change. Some parish councils are really active in this space, others less so. Understand who are perhaps the key contacts, what kind of support they might want from us as a borough council, whether that's resource or whatever that might look like. And also increasingly with the business community. So there was a recent Borough Business Partnerships event, and we have what's called a low-case grant scheme. So that's providing grants to small and medium enterprises to improve energy efficiency or promote their business further. So kind of where are we? Obviously report on a kind of financial year for us as a council on our emissions. And as we touched on last autumn, COVID clearly has had an impact, and sifting through some of that noise is challenging, particularly when we compare this year's emissions to last year's emissions. But when we look at kind of our baseline year, where do we start back in 2018-19 and even 19-20, when it's perhaps more a more normal year, we've seen quite a significant reduction, so 20% compared to 18-19, and a further 12% compared to 19-20. So there is some positive news coming out there, linked to a number of things there. So we've talked about, we've shifted to kind of green energy tariff. We are being more efficient in the way we work through the kind of smarter ways of working program that we've got here, transition to electric vehicles. A few of the headline things that we'll break down a lot more detail back in autumn. Obviously last year, a lot of buildings were closed or use was really minimal. So that had a big impact compared to 2020 to 2021. Of an absorption, for want of a better phrase. We're particularly looking at the role of the natural environment and links to the ecological emergency here. We have already undertaken a little bit of work when we launched our strategy on the impact our existing green spaces that we own as a council have. But we want to biodiversity and ecological issues to improve that. So that could look like habitat restoration, tree planting, other things like that. So we want to increase the kind of important impact that it already has. It could be that investing in other carbon sequestration schemes where we don't have enough land ourselves, for example, could further increase that. On the electric vehicle charging, we expect that it's not a once and done, but we look at other areas in the borough, and again work with county council colleagues, and there's a survey of resident information that we're using to help shape that as well. On the property side, we really want to ensure that we're prepared for kind of future grant funding and opportunities. We have a plan so that we're ready if opportunities arise. So we'll be looking at assessing the audits and the results of those. For our fleet of vehicles, so we're looking to trial this alternative fuel on kind of a proportion of our alternatives do become available. Further work on kind of residential energy efficiency or retrofit, some people call it, and we're planning a big push on this over the summer. It's really, as I said, really front and centre for a lot of people's agenda. There's a real need and plan to kind of work closer with housing associations here, which is something we've tried to commence before, but now looking to do further. And interestingly, already starting to talk to people like BCOT, the college, around training and skills, so that there is there's a big skills gap, I think, nationally on a lot of this new technology and even energy efficiency. So how do we make sure there's local job creation and the right skills here in Basingstoke and Deane? We want to make sure we understand what our residents and our communities and our businesses want. So we want to make sure we're doing enough research or views. The resident survey is going out, and there's an element of climate change, but also we're thinking about more specific focus areas. So we're looking at certain community groups to build on the parish and town council surveys we've already done. Increasing engagement with businesses as well through a series of events. We have kind of Green Week that we're reinstating after a couple of years of real challenging times for big events like that later in autumn. And also we see a really exciting opportunity to present some of the work we're doing on climate change, perhaps through a different lens, a different identity, to engage residents and groups that might not always engage with us as a council. We have a really great voice for certain things, but actually how can we bring as many people along board as we can and engage other partners in supporting us with that as well. Last couple, and then when we finish, so a kind of travel plan, for us as a council, how do we help people travel to and from work more easily, but actually as a council, how do we travel? Thinking about the Smarter Ways of Working programme, building on really good stuff there, and potentially helping ultimately support businesses do similar things in the town as well. And then our procurement and contracts review has been looking at kind of embedding, tackling climate change in buying decisions, increasing that as a consideration. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I acknowledge the full annual update, as Councillor Banner said, is going to be in autumn. And I'll break down a bit more detail of emissions, but also the action plan we've got. And there'll be kind of further update then in spring as this one is. So ultimately, kind of, ask of the committee is just to be aware of the contents of this update, and please do raise any recommendations with Cabinet. And obviously, any questions now, happy to field.
Lovely. Sorry, hang on. If I can just explain how it works, and then I'll try and write everyone's hands down. So generally, in this committee, we try and take questions first, and then comments afterwards. And if we've got to kind of make a decision, we'll also do debate and kind of come to a conclusion. There aren't any papers that need debating at the moment this evening, so we'll just do questions first and then comments. If you do realise you have a question later on, obviously still feel free to ask it. It just helps with minute writing and kind of keeping on track of where we are. I will do my best to write everybody's hands down, so please just put your hand up whenever you feel the urge to say something constructive, and then we'll do that. So far I've got Councillor Mackay. I have a comment. You have a comment? I'll leave you till later then. Councillor Tuck, Councillor Williams, Councillor Lee, Councillor Maleni, and Councillor Morrow. Perfect. Brilliant. Obviously, do wave at me at any time. So long as I smile and nod at you, I've got your name down. I generally go in order unless it sort of feels like we're hearing loads from one side of the room and other people are waiting, that kind of thing. We'll mix it up a little bit. Councillor Tuck.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. That's very helpful. It's a bit of a mystery to me, though, how we can talk about climate change and not include the environment, natural environment in that. And I noticed some of your bullet points did cover that. Can we have an update on the green infrastructure strategy combined with this so that we have a twice-a-year update on the action plan within the GI infrastructure? Is that doable, please?
Sure. I mean, I guess it's probably one for us to raise with Councillor Eachis. I guess the portfolios have changed and there's a lot more natural synergy now. There was also with the previous portfolio holder around the natural environment. So something we can take away. As you say, there's obviously overlap. One thing I did need to mention more is, we're always trying to increase our engagement across the council and with partners, rather than, it's not a siloed approach, which maybe sometimes comes across in terms of just climate change. But we can take that away and ask the question.
Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Okay, it's a very simple question. When you talked about the council travel plan, were you referring just to the council employees?
Sorry, Councillors, if you pause your mic, then we can...
No, I've not been trained how to pause it.
Initially, yes, but we'd certainly be interested in then, rolling that out to councillors as well.
My concern is that in terms of then looking at council travel plans, so for example, in relation to the recycling centres, so the strategic approach to reducing recycling centres may mean less travelling for Serco, etc., but it means more travelling for the public. And I think you've got to think, when you're looking at a council travel plan, I think you've got to look at what the balance and what the impact is on the wider public that we serve.
Lovely. I think the feeling, or one of the comments at the time when that decision was made, was that actually a lot of what was on at those really local centres was all recyclable at curbside. So one of the hopes was that that would also reduce some of those local journeys. Although absolutely I appreciate some of those items can't be, but the majority of them, like bottles and glass and plastics and cardboard, all can be taken at curbside, and the operators will take side waste for green waste as well, or if you've got the space you can have 2 green bins like I do because I'm greedy.
I think I was just trying to make the wider point. I may be wrong on the detail of that, and I wasn't privy to that discussion obviously, but I just make that as a wider point in terms of there is an impact, there can be an impact on the wider public.
Absolutely, and point noted. Councillor Bound.
Well, I was also going to say, of course, we live in a two-tier world, don't we, with the county council and district council, and waste is one of those where we have some joint responsibility but doing different things in what is essentially the same service. But of course, just to remind people that, of course, the county council is doing a consultation on their transport strategy at this very moment. So again, all those things that we can feed into the Transport Authority, which is the county council, will be really useful to them.
Lovely. Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Cheers, Sam, for the update. I've got a number of questions, and they probably don't even roll in succession to each other, so I'll just fire them out there. The first one was about sort of where we've come from. On one of the slides it gave, we had a 20% reduction in 1 year and then a 12% reduction the following year. Was the 12% reduction taken from the output of the figures from the 20% reduction? So you have your first number, you took your 20% off of that, and then you've taken 12% off of that output, or was it a 12% on the original number? So, because if you go with 12% of the 20%, it looks like we're slowing down.
I see what you mean. So those figures are comparing. So I guess the figure for 21-22 is 20% less than 18-19, and 12% less than 19-20. So that further is probably a slightly erroneous crept in there. So that's what it is. So 19-20 was less than 18-19, but we were still lower than that. If that makes sense, if that answers your question.
So what you're saying is that 1920's numbers was 12% less than what 18-19 it was. Is that right? If we go with if we just random numbers thrown out there, we start with 60. Right, and you take 20% off of that. Right, it gives you 48. Yeah. So was the 1920 12% of 48, or was it 12% of 60, which would, if it was 12% of 60, is a lot higher. Well, not a lot higher, but it is higher than 12% of 48.
So, if I understand, I think so. The reduction from the reduction this year, yes, is bigger. It's bigger from 1920 than it was between 1819 and 1920. If that makes sense. So yes, the bigger reduction since 1920 than there was between 1819 and 1920.
I don't think that maths adds up. No.
Could we maybe ask for a...
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, if you've got the figures rather than the percentages.
Sure. Yeah.
I think
We can send those around later if that to the committee. That'd be useful. And obviously, yeah, the autumn update will go into all a little more detail, almost why, you know, where those figures are coming from, what's the rationale in a bit more detail. So.
Sorry, Councillor Mackay would just quite like to interject.
I think the question is to understand whether the reductions refer to an original baseline or whether it's a year-on-year reduction.
Lovely. We will expect a written response. Yes. Perfect. Councillor Lee, did you have a second question?
Yes. So, the fact that we'll get some numbers is great, so thank you. It was good to see that you plan to work with housing associations. I just had a quick look at Vivid, and in 2021, they started thinking about making a plan. So what happens if their plan doesn't meet our plan for 2030? What's plan B for us?
I mean, I think it's fair to say that our borough-wide 2030 target is widely reliant on external partners. So, yeah, housing associations is a perfect example. Hampshire County Council have a net zero target of 2050, so that's, you know, clearly outside of that. So yeah, we are slightly trapped. I mean, they have a lot of requirements to improve their housing stock, and as you say, Vivid and Sovereign are perhaps a little further ahead. Perhaps have a lot of policies in place now. I think the biggest thing we can do, I don't know if Councillor Barnes will come in, is kind of leverage our relationship with them. Is a kind of mutual endeavour to improve place, you know, to improve what we have as Basingstoke. But obviously, yeah, we can't force them to do anything faster or more than they're already planning to do.
Sorry, Simon, before you jump in, is there anything that we can do to encourage them, like working with them to?
That's exactly what I was going to say, Councillor Lee, because it's that reality that says, I'm sure whoever the partner is, and the housing associations are a really good example, Vivid's a brilliant example, which has so many properties over such a large patch. If they create a plan, then as we turn around and say, what can we do to help you to deliver that faster in Basingstoke and Dean than you might in Gosport, then actually I'm sure they'd be really interested in that, because they won't want to try to do all of it at the end of their plan. So absolutely, that's why that partnership work in collaboration, say, how can we help you? Because some of our neighbours are going to have timescales which help them at the end of the plan, and we probably have one that helps at the beginning.
Perfect. I'm going to skip over to Councillor Mulleney, but I'll come back to you if that's all right, Councillor Lee, because you've got more.
Well, it's no, that, so it is finished on the. I guess with regards to that, then about other partners. So, BCOT as an example, obviously they're relying on funding from, you know, national government, local government to help them with their capital funding. How can we, you know, is there something that we need to do to help them there?
I think the reality is, and you've listed 2 partners, but the list of partners is actually huge, and it's going to be very different for all of the partners, whether there's a limit of what they're in control of, what they're not in control of, where they get their funding from, whether there's anything in there that, because, you know, there's certain things for some funders where it's conditional on sort of carbon neutrality. So what our job is to go through and speak to all of those key partners. What's difficult about that, of course, is that in some respects, the ones that seem hard might be easier to have the conversation with because they may be responsible for a larger carbon footprint. So you may end up with something like the hospital, where you end up in that sort of perennial debate, don't you, that says the best thing for the hospital, if you were to look at operational carbon, would be to knock down old hospital, build new hospital, but actually it wouldn't be for embedded. So it's that sort of stuff is that we need to have a conversation with all of them about their strategy and their tactics for their plan.
Councillor Mulleney.
No, it's okay. Sorry, I did my best to avoid acronyms, but terrible. So LOCATE stands for low carbon across the southeast. Yeah, sorry, so kind of.
Yes,
yeah. Easy, yeah. So a lot of the pricing will ultimately be determined by Hampshire County Council, who will operate the charge points. My gut is that it's going to be somewhere in between the two. So the the price charged will have to cover part of the cost of to cover its face, and so I expect it will be more expensive than your residential rate, albeit that's obviously going up a huge amount at the moment. But it's in areas, it's providing an opportunity for people who can't charge at home, so it's giving them that alternative. So it's trying to provide that option for them.
And just to be really clear, we need to understand it is a Hampshire County Council funding bid, which we are supporting. It is their bid for their equipment on their roads, and actually we are making a significant financial contribution for that bid to happen. And only today I'm being asked to increase the amount of support to make Hampshire County Council's bid work. So I absolutely encourage you to talk to your Hampshire County Council colleagues about it.
Yeah, if I can make a comment here, I'm representing as a borough councillor here, so completely it is relevant to the Hampshire County Council on this aspect. And the second thing is, it is again, the rich is getting benefited, where they can afford own charging points and they have a residential parking permit, they can use their residential electricity and they can get benefited. Whereas the poor people who doesn't have their, they don't have their own car charging facilities, they have to use these facilities where they are getting commercially charged. So it is not going to help the residents who are stuck with no parking facility to charge them. So the council can influence or need to do something to level up, which we are posting about it on this aspect.
Can I just pick that point up? Because I think there's also a reality that we need to think about the total cost, because you're partially right, but not completely right. Because if you own your own residential property, you'll also be expected to pay to have your charging point installed. So you have a significant cost up front. There's also a reality that says we probably also know from a cost point of view and also from a carbon point of view, what we need to encourage people to do is not to own a car, even if it is EV. So absolutely one of the things that's in the plan to look at are things like car clubs, so that you don't have to invest in a charging point or a car. So actually it makes it easier for more people to access a car who can't afford to buy one. So there are multiple levels to cost, and also we need to look at convenience, and we also need to look at the things that we're in control of and things that we're not.
Lovely. I've got no more questions being waved at me after Councillor Morrow. So, Councillor Jeans. Perfect. All right, Councillor Morrow.
Hi. My question was about supporting relevant training and job creation. So one of the simplest jobs, I believe, and most effective is draft proofing and insulating homes. Do we do any of that? Are we going to at the moment?
So do you mean as a council, do we go out and, sorry.
No, as in, do we support companies to do it? Do we encourage it? Because we've got obviously a difficult winter coming. The best thing we could do is insulate homes, help people draft proof their homes so that their energy bills go down. It seems like we should be doing something to help that, encourage it.
Agreed, absolutely. So partly kind of on that engagement piece, so one of the big kind of comms programs and comms campaigns we're planning over the next few months is around energy efficiency, particularly at lower income homes, and part of what we're looking at is pushing messaging out there, but going to people, rather than having people come to us, finding that information. Actually, could we go to centres, community centres or groups or things like that to talk about the benefits, why it's really important, the money, for them it's money, it's potentially health and well-being, damp, mould, all those kind of things, as well as the carbon impact. But promoting the kind of schemes that are out there for them, pointing in the direction of other support, other trusted voices, because I think that's the other challenge. On the kind of job point of view, we hope that things like the grant schemes that we're doing is starting to stimulate that demand, so that the installers go, do you know what, there's a pipeline of work for us to take on apprentices, take on employees. The conversations we've got with people like BCOT are very early on that, more looking at some of the technologies like heat pumps and solar panels. There are lots of wider conversations, I think, on the construction skills piece as well, that around things like many down and stuff. So I hope that kind of addresses your question. So the answer is, yeah, we're pushing it and trying to do a lot more of this summer in particular.
Yeah, my point is that the heat pump side of things, and they're quite expensive schemes. A very cheap scheme is to insulate homes and to draft proof them. So if we're under that job creation part, you know, I know it's not need a lot of training, but at the same time, you know, I got my house done. I had my heating on full blast, and I was still cold in winter until I got it insulated. So it's something that I think should be right up there. So
I'll add that to the comments. Councillor Jeans.
Mine is more comment rather than question, if we're done with questions.
I think Councillor Lee has some questions. Or are you on comments as well?
So just another question, really. Well, I remember it's either last year or certainly in recent history, we ran a stop idling your car at roundabouts campaign. Do we have any figures to suggest that that has worked and therefore helped lower emissions in the borough? Because what I'd be worried about is that we come up with all these initiatives to help, you know, X, Y, Z, but actually nothing, you know, has a significant improvement to the overall number. So if we've got historic data to say that this campaign did work and we've gone from, you know, whatever number down to a lot lower, I think that would be great. But considering a lot of our roundabouts now have more traffic lights than less over the years, and more to come, I'm just wondering whether that was an effective campaign. And
Good question. I can take that away. I think that was linked with particularly air quality and our environmental health colleagues around anti-idling. So yeah, we can ask the question about data. I guess the nice thing about some of these schemes is we can track how many people take them up and model kind of carbon savings and financial savings as a result. But you're right. How do we know stuff's working? And that's something we're really keen to do as a team. Make sure we're monitoring and tracking as we go.
Lovely. Any more questions? No, in which case Councillor Mackay was very keen to do a comment. He almost volunteered for a question. No, it's fine. You go.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Sam. I just wanted to remind the committee of a motion the council passed, I think it was late last year, suggesting there could be very interesting lessons to learn from the Park Erin development of new homes in South Wales, built to very high green standards, not necessarily totally applicable, but in the context of a borough facing a lot of new house building over the next few years, I think the sooner those lessons, if there are lessons to be learned, the better. I understood in an email exchange with Mark Lambert about a month ago that some initial contact had been made with the people down there. I just wanted to bring it to the committee's attention and ask that the next update includes an update on that particular matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jeans.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, Councillor Lee did start to touch on what I was going to comment on. Councillor Mummel-Anani and I have spent many an afternoon outside of schools with engines idling, and we really enjoy being shouted at by people for asking them to turn off their engines whilst they're waiting for their children. What I will say is that we need to come together to enforce the policies that we already have in place to enforce the car idling policy so that I don't get shouted at anymore. Thank you.
Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, no, idling outside schools and other places is an absolute pet hate of mine. I do remember reading of a campaign, I think, in the Manchester area where they had some success by getting the local schools to talk to their kids, who in turn would talk to their parents about the problems relating to idling, which is very effective because parents do sometimes listen to their children, and it doesn't put councillors in a potentially difficult situation with the public in the street. Just a thought.
Thank you for your comment, Councillor Mackay. What I would say is that it's whilst they're waiting for their children to come out. I love engaging at that level, but no, it's a question that a lot of my residents ask me: is when are we going to enforce this?
Well, I was just going to add, because I think you're all absolutely right, that of course, and it goes to the previous question about what's been the difference as far as the overall carbon emissions. Well, I suspect the overall impact of that campaign on carbon emissions will be tiny compared to the huge amount of carbons that are emitted. There's something more powerful about turning and saying, where are those areas where we have issues about air quality and we'd rather it was much, much better? Schools are always going to be one of those places. And I think it's fair to say that I think most schools, it may even be all schools, are expected to have a transport plan and do strategies like park and stride. And a lot of that does do what I would call the pester power, because we know the power of pester, don't we, from children to parents. So they do a lot of education in the schools to absolutely just do that, and I know they do that in our schools here. So that it is that stuff, isn't it, that says, you know, can you turn off the engine? You know, we've been taught all the damage that there is. But I think it's one of those things that's truly difficult, isn't it? Because I think we've all stood there and taken some abuse outside schools, because there is that stuff, isn't it, about whether it's about speeding, whether it's about idling, whether it's about just being really aware of where children cross the road. But absolutely, which is why I think it's really interesting about the enforcement, because I think the amount of enforcement that any authority could do isn't as strong as the pester power.
Councillor Tuck.
Hi, just in light of this discussion, I had a very useful discussion with our Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust this afternoon, and I just like, this is very pertinent to this bit, but they flagged there's a behaviour change for nature toolkit by the Behavioural Insights team, and I think the stuff that they talk about there, their toolkit of strategies, which is about motivate the change, socialise the change and ease the change, all of those techniques, pester power, love that idea. Somewhere in there, there's great stuff to do. But I honestly think we could really benefit from looking at some of those and using those change management strategies to actually benefit, the next generation breathing in fresh air and not car fumes. Thank you.
Any more comments? Councillor Court.
Just a reminder that actually idling your engine while you're stationary is illegal. It's illegal in the first place. So, you know, we should be just trying to remind everybody what they're doing is illegal.
Lovely. Right, I'm going to do my best to summarise all that then. Concerns were raised around the difficulties accessing charge points and prices of residential versus commercial, but it was also noted that that's not fully within the borough's power to influence. There was importance of working with local businesses with a focus on draft-proofing homes, and the team were asked to look at ways they might be able to improve that. We were requested an update on the previous notion. I've written green homes in Wales. is that detailed enough?
Park Aaron.
Park Aaron. Hopefully Julia will get that bit. Idling outside of schools was raised as an issue. Education in schools is helpful but not 100% effective. And therefore I think the officers are being asked to see if there's anything they can do to work with Hampshire colleagues to make that better. And then Councillor Tuck recommended that officers and I think committee members looked at the behaviour change for the nature toolkit. If you could send a link round, that would be really appreciated. Lovely. Have I missed anything?
Just an update on the numbers side of things.
Absolutely. Perfect. Right. Thank you very much, Sam and Simon, for your stand-in performance. We will now move on to the draft wellbeing strategy. Lovely. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us at committee this evening. Councillor Fox, would you like to introduce and then pass over to your officers?
Thank you very much, Chair. It's lovely to be here. So this strategy, the wellbeing strategy, I can't take ownership from really quite yet. Councillor Bean has been working with Helen and her team on this strategy for quite some time, and I've sort of come in at the end, or towards the end, so I'm not going to take credit for it at all. It has come here in a genuine attempt to consult with CEP members, to engage with you and to hear your views about the strategy. And as the paper says, we're welcoming your views on the proposed vision, themes and direction of the strategy, the proposed action plan, the next steps and approach to further engagement. And with no further ado, I'll ask Helen to just introduce and give you more detail than I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fox. Good evening. So I thought it might be helpful to perhaps share the journey that we went on in order to come forward with the strategy, and hopefully that will give hopefully that will provide some interesting background to the strategy and the action plan that we have. So I think it's fair to say that we are on a journey with the strategy. This is our first foray on the wellbeing strategy. We know that residents' quality of life is a key priority for the council, and that's been reflected in the council plan and the strategies that support it. We know that physical and mental wellbeing are fundamental to healthy communities. We've got a lot of facilities within the borough, but also green spaces that we can utilise and benefit from. And one of the things, therefore, is that we have been active members of a health and wellbeing partnership. So we already have good working links with health and wellbeing colleagues across the borough and within county. And we also participate in something called the Shared Health and Wellbeing Plan, which is a key set of activities that we deliver as a group of colleagues into the health and wellbeing agenda. There are activities ongoing across the council's wider business to support our residents' wellbeing. And so what we've done is to help on the bottom of the action plan, we've actually put where those links to other strategies or other pieces of work are included. So despite our involvement in many activities, what we've never really had is a very council-specific definition of a wellbeing strategy articulated around our key strengths. It was during the COVID pandemic, what we started to notice in the wider nation was really a polarising effect on communities. So we had some people that actually set up new regimes and became more active, and we had others who became less active and more sedentary. So as a result of that pandemic, I think it's true to say that the health and wellbeing sector itself is starting to rethink future provision. So they're looking specifically to sort of maximise resources and outcomes for our residents. So there's been a sustained national messaging throughout the pandemic around sort of healthy food, being more active, but that doesn't necessarily mean being involved in specific type of sports, but just walking, cycling, getting out and about. And that in itself helps you to stay socially connected, which supports good mental well-being. So as a team, we started to look at what is our role as a council and how do we achieve that. We recognise that once somebody has health and social care needs, that really they're moving into the NHS arena and social services. So what is our role as a council? And what we thought was that actually anything that we can do to help to prevent people from moving into the need for care and support is really important. But also for people, and we know that many of our communities do actively engage with things like Totally Tennis's mental health sessions and health walks. They're already trying to help themselves, and they thought, what can we do to support our partners in helping those residents and empowering them? So the idea is that we want to move to use our facilities to support our residents and our partners to achieve good outcomes for our communities. So I think the areas that we looked at, public health profiles and active lives. We did this in consultation with, and I use that word not in its formal sense, but in dialogue and meetings with colleagues across the region. And what we discovered is that whilst our adult population has lower than average obesity levels, when you actually look at the population who are overweight and obese as a group, the actual overall total is above the average. In the same way that we know that we have some residents who are at the national average engagement for activity, but we have a really hard to reach community group who don't do any activity at all. In terms of mental well-being, we found that 13.7% of the adult population in the borough have a diagnosed form of depression, and actually that's higher than the average national figures. 34% of the population in the borough feel lonely, which again is above the national average of 9%. So we felt that that gave us two very clear indices of support that we could assist with. And the other thing that we are very aware of from feedback is that in order to support well-being in our communities, we obviously need to look at the infrastructure around that. So we know that an important part of the work that we need to do in the future is to participate with our partners around the creation of a new hospital, a health and wellbeing campus, but also look to wider health improvements in local facilities. And is there anything we can do with our own existing facilities to help with things like community hubs for wellbeing? So the vision itself is on enabling communities to be healthy, happy and resilient. And what we've asked to do is that the strategy should enable activities to help reduce obesity, enable activities that help us to improve mental well-being, and work with our partners in the creation of the new hospital. So we are trying to establish what is currently provided across the council, and there is a very wide remit of action, so we've tried to capture that in the action plan. To be clear on what we need to achieve, and identify where our resources can best be placed. We need to build them on mutual benefit and find the overlapping priorities with our partners so that we can work together to really maximise the potential of the outcomes for our residents. And we need to continue the work in the sector to build our relationships. One of the key strengths that we have is our network of connections through our officers and our member engagement. So, we're not going to just use our physical facilities, but we're also going to use our online communication and digital facilities, so things like websites to help people find places to go for a walk. If you're not somebody who naturally goes for a walk, what can we do to help people engage with the facilities that we have? So we would really welcome your thoughts on the visions and the themes and the direction, the action plan, recognising that this is a first step. And what we need to do on our next steps is now to have a wider consultation with key partners and then really firm up that action plan, recognising that there are some key statistics that we gather year on year that will help us to give some continuity on our measures. So that's just a synopsis of how we got to the strategy.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Helen. Do we have any questions for officers on this report? Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Before I pose my question, I'd like to say that There's much to admire in this document, and it's very comprehensive, and I welcome it. And I've experience of Mike Amani and his team, and I think it's a credit to them there. Having said that, I have got some concerns and questions. My first question is, what do we mean by enabling?
So I think, my apologies. So I think there might be different ways that we actually do this. So in tangible terms, for example, there are contracts that we have to provide sport and leisure facilities in the borough. So what can we do with those contracts to articulate the outcomes that we want to see? We might, for example, be able to use grant funding and to tie that into outcomes that we want to see to achieve. So there are some tangible things that we can do with our existing facilities to make that happen. And in terms of our new facilities, there are things like our 106 funding, for example, for new facilities. Again, tying that into the outcomes that we want to achieve and making that part of the process.
Can I come back? Okay, thanks very much for that. I'm just concerned that just by focusing on enabling rather than leading, whilst I recognise that others have got probably key responsibilities, but I do think in some circumstances it ought to be on us to lead. The other bit that I find difficult is this chicken and egg question about finances. So what the paper says, what the introduction to the paper says, is we can't actually talk about the financing until we've got the strategy in place. But actually, knowing what sort of finance that you've got can influence the type of strategy that you put forward. So am I right in that?
I think it will depend as we develop out the action plan, because I think at the moment the action plan is the first step. I think we need to have those conversations with our partners and almost like the inevitable Venn diagram, find where those areas of overlap are. And then we need to look at building in those specific projects, for want of a better word, to then bring them forward through the normal council budget rounds where we feel that needs to be invested in. There might be opportunity to attract external investment to some of those areas. So we also want to look at what other external investment might be available to us and our partners as part of that process.
Thank you for that explanation. But what I wouldn't want to happen would be for council investment to be less than it ought to be in terms of not just relying on existing facilities, but relying on maybe new facilities, particularly to get to hard-to-reach people.
Thank you. Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for this strategy. You clearly worked very hard on it, and it's really helpful. Lots of really good content in there. Thank you. I just wanted to bring up a few ideas that made it slightly broader, because I think there's an awful lot about sport and leisure, which is fantastic, because I agree it's incredibly important and often overlooked. But I wonder whether we can also include a bit more about housing. Councillor Morrow has already touched on that, and it's so important in terms of keeping people warm, especially, as he also said, this year when the cost of living is so high and the cost of heating will be very high. And also getting quicker responses with regard to things like mould. So I think we just need to have a good look at our housing stock and what we can do to help people and their health and well-being through improving it. I think also there should be more inclusion about agencies in the health and wellbeing strategy, because BVA, CAB, etc. have a huge role in supporting people with their mental and their physical health. And I think that we need to support them in the best way we can, and we need to understand the support that they need and provide it. Then looking at community centres, I agree 100% with what Councillor Williams said. Yes, we should promote schemes, but we should also be establishing schemes and leading those schemes. Leisure facilities too. There's a brilliant example with the Aquadrome, where we've actually brought together people in the CCG and Hampshire hospitals with people in the Aquadrome to have a discussion about lots of different schemes that they can establish. And the council had a very important role in that, and it's going to be an ongoing role. So I think leadership is key there. And the final area is about the environment, about what we can do to make paths and cycleways accessible. One thing that I've been told recently from someone who's a very keen cyclist is that frequently he goes along cycle paths, but then suddenly they're completely overgrown and don't look like cycle paths anymore. And so people who actually do get on their bicycles and try really hard to use those paths, it's really important that they work for them. Two other very quick points I wanted to make that pick up on something before.
Sorry, Councillor Conrad-Bennett, I'm still trying to stick to questions.
I'm so sorry.
Can I come back to you for more comments? Unless
yes,
there is
sorry, these are questions. Oh, sorry.
Perfect.
The two questions are, do we still have a health and wellbeing partnership? Do we still have a health and wellbeing partnership? And if so, who's in it? Because I wasn't quite clear what that was. And do we have a health and wellbeing plan? Because again, Helen mentioned it, but I wasn't quite sure what it was.
Yes, we do have a health and wellbeing partnership. Can I circulate the attendees in writing, if that's okay, rather than me trying to remember a list off the top of my head? Yes, there is a health and wellbeing shared plan, and again, I'd be happy to share that with you outside of the meeting if I can send a printed copy of that round. Thanks.
Perfect. Councillor Connor.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great piece of work. Thanks for that. I'm just, because I'm target driven in my role outside of this, you've got some stats in, some sort of broad brush stuff. How are you going to measure success locally?
So I think that the measurement of this is going to be really difficult, and I think it's something that we need to work on with our partners. There are the stats that we've gathered from the public health profile and active lives, and we use that quite widely in the wellbeing, health and wellbeing area. So I would imagine that that will be where most of our key statistics are driven from. Some of these processes are likely to be incredibly long time frames, so there may not be a very easy KPI to apply to them. Where we can create them, then I think that we should, and that's why we wanted to have a very defined action list so that we could really think about them in detail. But we need to do that with our colleagues across Hampshire, the NHS, the ICS, the CCGs as well, to actually come up with tangible measurements if they can be articulated.
Sorry, just to add a little bit as well, with the kind of facility investment that we're doing, we do get some tangible data back now. So for certain investments, things like the new 3G pitches that have gone into the Vine and Testbourne, they have to submit annual information back as part of the Football Foundation grant, so we're able to access those figures as well. We put in a kind of system at Stratton Park for the open plan tennis, which allows us to kind of have a booking information on it. So we've gone from almost having no data of how many people using the facility to kind of actually now becoming a well-used facility and the information behind that. So that's something that we're looking to pilot, potentially those schemes, kind of impact they've had in the last 12 months, and then seeing if we can bring that forward on any new schemes that come up.
Thanks. It's sort of alluding to what my colleague just mentioned, is that if the way I would see this is if the council can take lead in some of these these events or interventions, projects, or what you call, that's the carrot, isn't it? If you're going to fund them, then the KPIs can be set with the organisations you're working with. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Mummaleni.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm looking at these percentages, and some of these percentages are not really adding up or not really not helping me at least to draw some conclusions. For example, here, if you look at on page number 25, there are 65.7% people are overweight or obese. At the same time, we are saying 66.3% people are very active. That means at least 20% of the people are obese but active. So can you please provide us the actual data, absolute data behind these percentages so that it gives us more insight where we need to really focus on. These percentages are not really much helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, be happy to. We have it.
Lovely. Councillor Lee.
Thank you. A number of questions again. You can kick me along whenever you feel like it, obviously. Just on the stats, though, which area are we looking to focus in on? Is it a longer life expectancy? People that are less obese? You know, which is the priority within this? Because if we have a look at Hart, our neighbouring council, they have a longer life expectancy than in Basingstoke. So, you know, where are we going to target first and measure?
So I'd love to spring off the top of my head exactly which ones they're going to be, but I think this is why we need to do the piece of work with our partners to actually find out what is the objective that, for example, the NHS will be targeting so that we can target in the same area where we have a synergy, for example, on obesity, because that will allow us to then maximise what we can get with what we have, but also for all of us to be hopefully measuring similar outcomes so that we know that we're being consistent across the different service areas. So that will become clearer as we develop out the action plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, could I just add to that, Councillor Lee? This is quite a tricky strategy in that we have no statutory obligations to do any of this health and well-being. But it's obviously something we want to do because the health and well-being of residents of Basingstoke and Dean Borough are absolutely paramount to us. So we want to contribute, but it is an optional extra, if you see what I mean. And so what we have to be really careful with doing is, as Helen is diplomatically putting it, working with our partners in health and public health to make sure that in the two areas that we've identified in this strategy as being the utmost, the one where we'll get the greatest, if you like, the greatest need is that the data tells us, which is obesity and mental health, those two big areas, what is it that we can do to contribute to the strategies of our health partners? So the resource that we can put in it is clearly a bit limited because it is, let's be honest about it, but we can make a big difference with that. Whether it's working with our housing colleagues has been raised today to make sure that what can we do to help if we've got houses that need better insulation. You know, we've got the grant scheme that we were talking, you know, it's gone out today in our publicity, for example, for insulation. So there are lots of things, you see, that we can do that would help, but essentially at the end of the day, the data that will come back will probably be our health partners. Mostly, if you're talking about length of life or any of those things, that'll be the health system that will provide that kind of data. What we might be able to do is talk about how many more of our residents are from particular postcodes that we know are deprived areas are accessing our tennis courts, for example, because we know who's booking the courts. So that we can get a view to, okay, we're opening up access to tennis, for example, to a wider group. It could be the football fields doing the same thing. So the data that we get might not be as qualitative for us. The qualitative stuff, I think, might be coming from the health system. What we might get is, you know, we've enabled these number of contracts to be set up where they have to provide more facilities for people who have mental health challenges, etc. So, for example, Totally Tennis at the moment have a really, it's quite well attended course for people with mental health issues that can come and play tennis with each other. And there's all sorts of other things going on. I'm just giving you little examples. So they seem quite small what we're doing, but if you put them in the whole and you put them with what our health partners are doing, then I think it does make a big difference. So I hope that helps with putting it in context.
Thank you. I'm assuming as part of that you will be taking, as Councillor Collins said, baseline figures to say that we started off at X and we're going to, adding one more person to the list is not, it's an improvement, but it's, we could have gone further, right? We could have done 10, 20 or whatever. I'm assuming those figures will be taken. And
So figures in relation to what, Councillor?
so your example that you've enabled with the tennis courts, we can track how many people use the tennis courts. How are we then going to enable more people to use those tennis courts? And what is the improvement strategy to make that accessibility, say, obviously Stratton Park, Kempshire area, for people of Winklebury accessing those tennis courts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, I'm sure we can. I'll hand that over.
Yeah, so that's part of the sort of leisure recreational needs assessment. The idea is obviously over at Winklebury you've got the kind of multi-use games area, and that's somewhere that we might highlight for, say, investment, and when we do that we'll roll out the same scheme that we've got at Stratton Park. So for things like residents of Winklebury, we'll then have the tangible evidence to say actually it's now a scheme that we know how many people are using it. So things like our tennis operators, are they running more classes out of Winklebury? They have the obligation at Stratton Park to run things like tennis lessons. What else are they doing with things like aerobic tennis and things like that? So schemes they can put on to increase participation at those sorts of sites.
Brilliant, thank you. My other, it's a question but also a comment. And very picky of me to raise it maybe. The vision, could we perhaps change it to, rather than being healthy, happy and resilient, that it's healthier, happier and more resilient? Right? I just think that healthy, happy is kind of, we're sat at a baseline, and if we're going for, we want more people to be healthier, we want them to be happier than what they currently are. Maybe I'm just being a bit too picky, sorry.
We can certainly take that back. We have a look at that, Councillor Lee. Yes, it's just as a vision, it's very much a longer term rather than a short term tactic. But
Councillor Williams.
Could you, in that case, and looking at the wording of the vision, take on the leadership point that I made and my colleague made down there? Because I think there should be leadership where appropriate.
I have that already noted down in my comment section.
Maybe I'll learn to trust you.
Hopefully I'll prove worthy, hey? Right, so I think that's it for questions. Does anyone have any more comments? We have snuck in a few, but Councillor Mackay, then Councillor Mullany, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, apologies if you already considered this, but I just wanted to mention the concept of leading and lagging indicators, which are widely recognised in health and safety management. And if you divide your indicators into those categories, it'll make it a little bit easier to answer some of the questions I think that came up and help you focus on the indicators that will drive an improvement and bring about the improvement in the lagging indicators. So more exercise, it would be a leading indicator, something positive you can do, whereas life expectancy is a lagging indicator. Thank you.
Councillor Mullany.
Sorry. Yeah, these are the small things that the borrow can help us to make. You mentioned in your report, ma'am, that is about hard to reach communities. So these are the simple things which enables this section of the population to use the existing facilities. Another one that I would like to mention, the second comment, is the section 4.4 of page 18, which is the equality, diversity, and inclusion of this one. This assessment concluded that there will be a positive impact as the strategy promotes physical and mental well-being for all these aspects. But here I would like to make one comment. During the pandemic has exposed the vulnerabilities in the health systems. A section of the population has been severely affected when compared to the majority of the population. And diabetes and obesity, hard to reach community, it is very hard to, it's very high in those communities. This strategy is not really addressing the specific measures that you are planning to take on those ones. So if you include those specific action points to address the vulnerabilities in this area. Thank you very much.
Councillor Lee.
Have we moved on to comments rather than questions?
You can still ask a question.
The question, yeah. Sorry, I was just got quite engrossed with that there. I noticed that there are short-term priorities for 1 and 2, but no short-term priorities for strategy 3. Is there a reason for that, or is that because it's outside of our remit in terms of being able to enable a new facility at hospital and plan?
Yeah, for exactly that reason.
Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. 3 quick comments. The first one is looking at the action plan. I think one thing we can measure is what we achieve in terms of what deliverable we achieve. So, for example, working with a group to achieve X, because at the moment there are lots of actions, which is fantastic, but it's hard to know when we've completed any of the actions. Continue to work to update and signpost weight management initiatives. It would be really helpful to have a report or just something tangible, so we know we've done it and we know we've done it well. And that can be something that we can achieve, so it doesn't rely on our partners, but I think it's really important to have something that we can achieve. Second one is, in several of the sections of the action plan, it refers to Hampshire County Council's Connected Support, which is a fantastic directory that they're developing. But having spoken to BVA and Hampshire County Council, it's a struggle because it's finding out about loads and loads of initiatives all over Hampshire and putting them all in a directory. And one thing that BVA said would be really helpful is if BVA could create a directory for Basingstoke. But the problem they've got is they haven't got funding for it. And they said it would make an enormous difference to them and people in Basingstoke if we could look for that funding specifically, because it's obviously something, according to the strategy, that's needed. And the final thing is, it sounds very picky, and I'm sure that it's more my reading than anything else, but quite often we've got EG instead of, we've written IE in the action plan, when it might be better if we wrote EG, because IE is quite specific. So IE would just be referring to the organisation that's mentioned, like Basingstoke Leisure. When if we wrote EG, for example, it could include other organisations as well, and I think that might be helpful.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tuck.
Thank you. Obviously a huge piece of work. I would like to see the natural environment feature more in the actions. There's loads of research that demonstrates the importance of access to natural space and nature that enhances mental well-being and physical health. I hear that we've got partners that we're working with and through, but actually I'd like to see us working with some of the wildlife trusts or other organisations associated with that. And there are things that on the leadership side that we can do in our local plan update and our policies, things like access to community spaces, community green spaces, community gardens where you can encourage social cohesion and interaction, where you're far more likely to encourage small behavioural change, which is the way that you get somebody out of the difficult situation they may happen to be in. And I would also refer you to some information I got from, I have to say, our Wildlife Trust again today, which was things like the New Economics Foundation. You may be familiar with their 5 ways to well-being. And indeed, things like the University of Derby, 5 ways to be closer to nature. And what's the other one? Influencing behaviours, moving beyond the individual, the ISM, individual, social and material. So all those, and there are lots of things, the practical application of these reports is all about, for example, encouraging you to do something in your garden or your community space, which might just be a little thing, but which at the end of it, you've done something that enhances wildlife, makes you feel good, and probably looks pretty or tastes good. And I do think there are lots of step changes that we could make through having that as a thread through these actions, which otherwise are much drier. If I dare say that. But thank you.
Lovely. Oh, Councillor Morrow.
Just got a comment. One of the things we're talking about, encouraging outdoor activities, community engagement. One of the things that I feel has a big impact on this is when we close public toilets, or if we give a parish council, town council the opportunity to run the toilet or buy it and run it. If they can't afford to, the option to then have to close it. I mean, especially with the elderly, if they come out and want to be out in the village for a little bit, they've got to go back home, or they might decide they're not coming out in the first place. So I do feel that impacts. Thanks.
Councillor Williams.
I try to confine my comments to 2 points, really. In relation to mental health and children, that there's something I think that may be a gap in what we're proposing. And that really relates to young people aged 14 to 19. In the last decade, there's been a reduction in spend on youth services of £1 billion. That's 70% of the budget. And what we've seen through COVID is that young people have become disconnected, losing confidence. I actually, before I was elected as a councillor, or before I even knew that I might be elected as a councillor, tried to get off the ground some youth provision and found out that this council had actually stopped its youth services. Hampshire's not doing very much. And I think that there's a gap in here if we're saying the issues to tackle is increase awareness, education and benefits. If we don't invest in our young people at that age, we've got a huge problem for the future. And I think that that's something that needs to be addressed. Now, whether the action plans do cover that, I'm not sure, but I think it needs specific attention to do that. I then go on to say how I think it can be done. Helen, I think you mentioned community hub. John Mackay will be pleased that in Scotland, the concept of community sports hub is a very, very driven process. And I think that's something important here. So what you're looking at are community facilities that provide a multifunctional basis. If it's around sport, it can be football, it could be rugby, it could be swimming, it could be something like that. If it's not sport, it still can have a range of indoor activities. And I think it's important that we actually invest in some of our existing facilities, instead of looking at them in isolation, look at them in the broad term of a community hub. So they're running a range of facilities. So mum takes her son to football training and then she can actually engage in Pilates while they're there. Grandfather takes grandson to football, granddaughter to football, and can engage in some facilities. And there's not a stigma. And I think this is how you get to some of the hard to reach people that don't normally associate with activity. Also then, you can help to engage with those young people who are lacking the confidence but can go on and can meet people like themselves outside the school. So I think that's important. The document also puts great store on the built sports facilities and the playing pitches strategies. What Paul knows is those two documents that we've got, research was done in 2014. The documents relate to 2015. I don't know what the plan is in terms of updating them, but Sport England, in the context of the recent Camrose case, did say that they were out of date and not reliable. So it's really important, and I'd like to know what plans we've got to do that. When we went ahead previously with the built sports facilities and the playing pitches strategies, we separated that out. So sports built facilities were indoor, all those indoor activities. Playing pitches strategies were all those outdoor activities. What I'm concerned about is actually, if you're going to get the best buck for your money in relation to that, you need to invest in community facilities that embrace sport. It's not just sport, but embrace sport and indoor activities as well that cover the whole range of people in those communities. And to me, that type of, I would like to see that reflected strongly in this strategy document, because it actually supports the paper that you previously have discussed at this group, the strengthening communities, because actually you engage volunteers to actually run those facilities, people who know what the needs are in their community and who can adjust. And I think that's the way that we get to hard to reach people in doing that. Also, I'm sorry to go on. No, I'm not. Also, there's no mention in this document about the leisure park, and we're going on to discuss the leisure park. Absolutely great opportunity to look at a community sports hub in relation to the leisure park, where that wouldn't be seen to be a stigma because it's a leisure activity that people go and can be engaged into. And I'll save some of my other comments when we get to discuss the leisure park, but thank you for indulging me.
Thank you. Officers, I saw somebody trying to comment.
Yeah, I'll just give you a quick update regarding the kind of playing pitch strategy and the built facility strategy. So we've commissioned and we've done the leisure recreational needs assessment, which is all the kind of needs analysis and background for it. The current playing pitch strategy, which is 2015 to 2025, and the built facility strategy is due to be updated later this year as well. So that will be where we take all the needs and we take out what's been achieved already in the last 5 years, and then update what the current needs are, and since things have moved on. With regards to those kind of elements, like I said, it's difficult. It takes a bit of time, as you know, Steve, with regards to the projects becoming live, which is why it's kind of a 10-year sort of document by the time you go through the whole planning process and collecting of kind of income. But it is something that will link back to this document once it's updated later on in this year.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much for that. But it is a fast-moving world out there, and demand is growing, and I think it's good that we can see a fresh document. Thank you.
I see no more hands. Oh, Councillor Lee, welcome.
Sorry, me again. I'd like to agree. Councillor Compton-Burnett said it sort of midway through about the strategy doesn't sort of, it's not broader than what it should be. And if we look at things like income, 40%, or those that are on the bottom 40% of the income scale are more than twice than likely to be exhibiting poor health. Whether that be through the fact that they can't afford to go to Tesco's and buy the nice ingredients to make a nice meal, or they're working so many shifts to try to bring in a wage that they're not, they're having to do a £5 shop in Iceland to build, which is all oven cooked food. So they're not eating healthily. Their kids are then subsequently not eating healthily. So I'd like us to, I don't know how we can incorporate income and helping people into jobs within the borough to raise the income level, so that those that are earning lower amounts can kind of feed themselves better, I guess. The other thing just to comment about really is around we've recently had an issue with food stamps being issued digitally. So I do question the delivering healthy eating courses delivered digitally to parents. What about those that don't access information through digital means? How can we broaden the scope so that more people are engaged, and what happens if there is issues? The internet goes out on a Friday, somebody cuts through a cable. How can we engage with our communities without the need to be digital? And this is coming from somebody that works for a tech company. I'm like to consider myself to be young, so I am technologically minded, but I think that there is, if you're on the breadline, you're not likely to be accessing stuff through technology these days still.
Sorry, yes, Councillor Fox.
Just a quick response to the first part of your very valid comments, Councillor Lee. You're absolutely correct that health and well-being is such a broad thing, and things like income and employment and all those things are really, really important, which is why, as I think Helen explained right at the beginning, how so much of what the borough does in lots of different strategies, there are elements of health and well-being things in them. And what the team have been trying to do here is to bring them together and also put a bit of momentum in some particular areas. I mean, there is a pretty good stab at trying to explain the other strategies. I think it's on page 33 of the pack. But you're absolutely right. What we need to do is, when these other policies come up, like our economic strategy around Basingview or whatever it might be, or other strategies, we need to make sure that the health and well-being element is remembered. So I think it's sort of beholden on all of us to support our officers and each other to remember that when we've got papers on other strategies that come here, or EPH or wherever they do, to remember the health and well-being and to make sure we get them included. Okay.
Councillor Connor.
Just to back that up, the strapline for that is health in all policies. That's the one that we use. Yeah.
Thank you. It becomes a little bit difficult because we're trying to have a climate emergency, an economic emergency, and so we're saying these are the golden threads that we've got to go through. We have to be careful about how many golden threads, but I welcome that suggestion.
Right, no further comments. You've given me lots of work right now in my sum up. So just as a general point, more data was requested, a bit more granular data, and the health and wellbeing partnership details. I'm going to try and summarise slightly in topic order. So I think in terms of the strategy, there was a strong request for the team to look at the balance between promoting and leading schemes for wellbeing, and also a suggestion about considering healthier, happier and more resilient. Then I've got a lot of action plan points, so they may or may not be in a sensible order. So I think that we've had quite a lot of comments about how the green environment is important and interacts with other things, be that overgrown hedges hindering cycling or facilities in green spaces and villages not encouraging access or use, particularly for older people. There's a real strong request to make sure that Basingstoke and Dean measures the impact and has a feedback mechanism for this action plan. Yes, I think purely from a sort of admin-y sort of point of view, it was requested that you check your IEs and your EGs to include more organisations, which makes sense. Lots of concerns raised about how we reach specific kind of harder to reach communities, and there are people who are at kind of higher risk, which I think is pulled out but perhaps needs to just be a little clearer in the action plan. Ones we specifically talked about were race, income and age, be that older or younger. There was a suggestion that BVA could create a directory of kind of resources and things for Basingstoke, but it would need funding. I'm nearly there. We were asked to, again, highlight the importance of green space in the natural environment and how that interacts with the whole thing, particularly with mental health, but also a suggestion that there may be more partners to include in the partnership working with that. And then finally, I think, there was a highlight on the 14 to 19-year-old, again, focus on mental health and the importance of youth provision and sports facilities in a sort of coordinated, hub-like way, and the link, how making sure that this policy does then link to other strategies and big important bits of work, like the leisure park, which I think is next on the agenda, unless someone thinks I've missed anything. Perfect. Thank you all for your comments. That was really helpful. Can I just do a little well-being check? Or is everybody all right? Does anybody need a quick 5-minute break? Because we've been sat here for a little while. No? Perfect. Lovely. In that case, welcome Councillor Bound. Welcome Kate. I don't know who's speaking first, but over to you both to talk to us about feedback on leisure park engagement.
I wasn't going to do a big intro. I thought it was just really important that Kate didn't sit here on her own, fundamentally. It's really important that for this item, isn't it, that leisure park's such an important part of what happens in our borough. We've gone through quite a history as far as where we are with the leisure park. Tonight's item is fundamentally about receiving the feedback from the engagement process. I think it's always interesting to hear everybody's views, and I'm sure new councillors will have strong views about what they would like to see in the leisure park, but there is something about this item which is absolutely about hearing what the feedback was from the engagement processes that happened, and I'll hand over to Kate to take us through those.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair and Leader, and good evening, councillors. The engagement process is a really important and early step as we develop the plans for both the facility mix in the aquadrome and the plans for the leisure park as a whole. The council appointed a team of consultants to help to support us in this work. We have appointed a company called BDP, who are the master planners, a company called FMG, who are specialist leisure consultants, and really they led much of the engagement strategy. So we ran it over the course of the beginning of this year. We had about 955 responses, which we were very pleased with. And as you'll see in the body of the report, feedback on a range of issues, including accessibility, green spaces, parking, active transport modes, as well as the sort of main topics about potential uses and facility mix in the aquadrome. The intention was to make it accessible and to approach as many people as we possibly could. So BDP led on the engagement with the existing stakeholders in the park itself, so that included the operators and the investors. They also spoke to ward councillors and led some of the engagement with members here at the council. FMG specifically spoke to leisure users at the Aquadrome, and then the council effectively led on the resident engagement survey. I'm not intending to go through all of the feedback as we've had it, as that's captured in the main body of the report. But just at the end, we've captured there the key themes in terms of the feedback that we've had. The engagement was carried out in accordance with the engagement plan, which was attached as Appendix 1 to the paper. And that feedback that we've had has now all been fed back to the consultant team, and they are now developing plans for the leisure park as a whole and the proposed facility mix in a future Aquadrome facility. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Right. Any questions on the report? And I do sort of appreciate the leisure park is this massive issue with lots of strong opinions, but we're just looking at quite a small part of it this evening. Any questions on the engagement? Sorry, Councillor Mackay, then Councillor Lee.
I'm just very surprised that no one raised the link between the leisure park and the football stadium situation such that it reached the summary of the report. Was it literally not raised or just not significantly raised?
This officer team has not been involved in the football club discussion at all. So it was understood that it was resolved and therefore we weren't asked to look at the football club issue.
Councillor Lee.
Excuse me, thank you. The ice rink is a very hot topic, and sorry, not the ice rink, the leisure park in general. I know there was a comment on here about that the Ice Users Forum may have kind of tainted, in a way, some of the results on the Aquadrome. Can I ask, at the time when the surveys were going out and the feedback was being gathered from user groups, why they weren't involved, so the Ice Users Forum, why weren't they involved as a user group and left to taint the results, in a sense?
I don't think the intention was that they tainted the results. They just were a very active group of respondees to the survey.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's why they felt that they needed to be so active in providing responses, because they weren't, as a forum of well over 1,000 people there, certainly the ice hockey matches, some of the biggest attended in sports in the borough. My son plays ice hockey there on a Saturday morning, and there are people that come from across the county and across counties to attend, and yet they weren't involved or engaged in a proper consultation session. Rather, they were left to respond via the survey only, whereas the Bluefins were engaged in a proper dialogue. Is there a reason why one wasn't counted in that?
I think it's primarily because the ice rink isn't a council-owned facility and there isn't an intention to move it. So the discussions that have been had in relation to the ice rink are about the owners and operators repairing the current facility.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bound.
It's always great, isn't it, with technology? I've got an answer to John's question, specifically from the comms team, because it was our internal comms team that dealt with the residents' feedback process. And the detail says that no one raised football club in the feedback.
Well, there you go.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Sorry, Councillor Connor's next, then I'll come to you, Councillor Williams.
Sorry. It's not so much of a question, it's more of a style thing. I found it, although once I've read it a few times, I did get I got the drift. But I thought I didn't think it was granular enough in terms of the data. So for instance, there was no no indication of the gender response, the age response, whether on the cultural, the community group responses, and there was no percentages as well. So it's fine to quote a number, but it's out of context if it's not based to something. So that was, sorry, it's just observations.
Councillor Williams.
I'm not surprised no one raised the question of the football club, because I think people relating to the football club thought the matter was resolved in their favour. And unfortunately, the planning inspector took a different view in relation to that. But my wider point is, what a consultation took place with people who don't attend at the leisure park? Were they consulted in any way? How was that achieved?
The survey was open to all residents, so it was
And
promoted.
how was that advertised? Sorry.
So we promoted that through an online survey. We advertised the fact that there were hard copies available. We promoted it through all of our social media channels. There were displays in the Aquadrome, and there was also a display in a vacant unit in the Malls. We promoted webinars that people could dial into. So we did a really sort of comprehensive promotion through our comms channels.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mulleney.
Thank you, Chair. I got a couple of questions. The first one is 955 responses out of 80,000 residents, if not more. So that constitutes to 2% of the population. And as the report says that it has been skewed by the ice rink users, which is 547. If I take it away from that one, we got 408 responses, genuine responses. Is it the fair representation for this consultation?
I think, Councillor, we did everything that we possibly could to promote it to all residents. And it wasn't just the survey response. As I said, we did webinars. People had the opportunity to access the information from hard copy displays around the town. So we can't influence who responds to us. We just do our very best to make sure it's accessible and everybody's aware of it in the borough.
I completely understand, and there is no way that I undermine your efforts. I appreciate it. But the thing is, why the people are not so... Everyone feels like, yeah, leisure park is one facility. Everyone admires it. And why are they not engaging? Is it something that we are missing at the top level? If we go with that 400 responses as the basis, are we really delivering what the exact people needed? That is my first question, and I leave it there. And the second question here, I would like to mention here is, yes, it is a point on page number 38, third bullet from the top, which says that out of these responses, 529 respondents answered no to have a housing facility, right? Is it completely ruled out based on this response?
I think we are sort of at a sort of early stage in the process. So just in terms of how we will engage with residents going back, as I said, this first piece of engagement was right at the start of the process. So we will continue to engage and update residents on the council website and things like that. In terms of the evolution of the master plan, that is still ongoing.
I'm going to ask her, because you're asking me a political point, so why don't I answer it? I think if we were to reflect on the history of the leisure park, I think lots of our residents and lots of our councillors were surprised that we had an organisation that wanted to invest in the way that they did in the leisure park with New River. It's very disappointing that fell through, but it's really important for us to understand the lessons to learn from that process. The lessons that I learned from that process is it's amazing how many people still want to invest in Basingstoke and Dean Borough. It's amazing how many people will still want to invest in the leisure park, because that process with New River told us things that perhaps we should have a little bit more pride in who we are and where we are, that actually we're in the perfect catchment to get all sorts of organisations to invest in our leisure in the leisure park. So to answer your question, because it's really interesting, isn't it, that it was put on the list that, you know, how would people feel? I think it's really clear for me that we should be doing everything that we can to create active leisure, going to the health point that we were discussing earlier, the active leisure that helps with some of those sort of wider predeterminates of health on the leisure park, and we should get as much investment as we can in leisure on the leisure park before we even start considering any other sort of generation of investment like residential would.
Lovely. I will just add my little comment of the ICE users' voices are still valid, and I don't want anybody watching this webcast to feel that actually their opinions aren't valued by the committee. It's quite clear by some of the other data in there that they don't just use the ice rink, and they are also using the aquadrome. They are also, you know, so I think, you know, it's important that we do listen to all the voices that took the time to respond, while also having a little lens of, well, you know, there were a lot of people who we know might value one resource more than anything else, and I think that still is useful.
Can I also add, there was a question about what activity do we undertake. One of the things that's also we shouldn't forget that's in the communications plan is that it was part of Basingstoke and Dean edition, which goes to every household. So that's 79,000 households. Now, I take the councillor's point about what is it that we can do to get people to engage with that. I also think there's a reality that says, if I thought about the New River response, New River did a lot of consultation as well, which told us a huge amount as far as what sorts of things people were interested in the leisure park, no matter who was providing it. I also put my human head on and say, do you know what, there's also a danger that people think, actually, I've been consulted on this before. I'm a true believer in consultation fatigue. You see it all the time in all sorts of things where actually it's like not another question about the same things. So I think there's a reality that says we should always thinking about building on the consultation that we've had rather than looking at every new piece of consultation as a separate and isolated piece of consultation.
Lovely. Councillor Mackay.
I don't know if this is allowed, but I'd like to invite the committee to support me in asking that the concept of a football stadium on the leisure park is at least considered by the consultants that we've engaged. Thank you.
Is there support for that across committee? Yes. Yes. In which case I'll add it to the comments. Oh, sorry. Yes. Well, I've got Councillor Lee next, then you. Is that? Yes.
So I would like to support that request as well, but I think that it needs to be broader in the sense that we've got a leisure park there, quite a very big piece of land that, in my opinion, and it's something that I've mentioned before being elected, is as a keen runner and a keen sportsman, I think we're in prime location to make that the centre of excellence for sport in the South East. During lockdown, a lot of professional athletes were having to move to certain areas where they could train because they were, you know, COVID secure and they were dedicated facilities. And I think with us being on the M4 and the M3, we are prime location to be one of those areas across the south. So I think football is yes, but I also think we should expand that to a centre of excellence for, you know, for sport, looking at some of the European models in terms of how they handle their buildings, turning it from, you know, ice rink to convention centre to stadium to, you know, that sort of sort of functionality. I actually, my initial response was I didn't want to create an argument, but thank you, Chair, for raising it. The Ice Users Forum, they're vocal because they're very passionate about their sport, and they feel aggrieved that they're getting left out. And I think they feel that it's not that it was more of an aquadrome consultation than a leisure park consultation. That was just their general feeling.
Lovely. I think committee can request that. I just would bring us back to the purpose of the paper, which is to look at the feedback, and the feedback wasn't asking for those things. So I think, you know, we can make a request, but I think we also have to be mindful that our residents have spoken, I suppose, and not asked for that specifically.
I just wonder whether you want me to respond to that, because I think it's all wrapped up in, and I wouldn't want to unpack it all, but I think, as Councillor Leeds' point is very valid, that the conversations, the process, the investigation, the consultation that happened with the Leisure Park and New River spent a lot of time talking about lots of those things. So actually, and why would you know, as a new councillor, I think it's really important for us to articulate to everybody to understand how much of those conversations, investigations have happened, because absolutely, and it's a great example, isn't it? You know, I would love nothing more than to have a multi-purpose stadium where actually we can have arena music for events, but actually one of the things that conversation took us to was realising how expensive that is. And it's that stuff, isn't it, that says, you know, should we put everything in the mix? Yes, we should, but there's also a reality of says, you know, we also don't want to spend a lot of time investigating things that we've investigated before if we can get the answer quicker. So I think all of those things are fair enough to say, you know, we need to make sure we look at the leisure park. You know, it's really interesting, isn't it? I found it really interesting from the observations of stakeholders that it's a huge space. It's quite green. You probably wouldn't realise how big it is because everybody drives around it. They don't run around it. They don't walk around it. Nobody is attempted to, you know, you don't see people walking around the park. So actually looking at all the possibilities from such a huge site is really valuable.
Councillor Williams, thank you for your patience.
That's okay. Just in response, I think Kate Dean did say it's an ongoing process in terms of consultation and engagement. So I don't think it rules out any suggestions by this group. In fact, it should be encouraged. My question was really about what consideration was given and will be given to the Hampshire County Council milestone site, because it seems to me that if you're looking at a nice mix and balance, that open area is absolutely integral to making it a destination site. And to me, I think that area could become, you know, the Milestones Gardens. It could have wildflowers displays. It could have tracks around it that could be used by cyclists and whatever. Last week I went to the northwest, and I went to Birkenhead Park, and Birkenhead Park was one of the first parks put together by Joseph Baxton, who laid out Chatsworth, and it was the model for the New York Central Park. And I think we ought to have an imaginative vision, work in partnership with Hampshire. I don't know how difficult they are, but it seems to me that they could benefit by actually using that area as a garden, as a heritage site. The tracks could be named after ex-companies in this town, so that people start to understand the heritage that was there. So I would, it started as a question. I just think that that's an opportunity that shouldn't be lost. Simon said it's a big area. It's an even bigger area when you take in that part, and you still could have exhibitions, fun fairs, circuses on there, but you could have a bit. At the moment, it's pretty barren, and I think Councillor Tuck would probably say, you know, natural environment there. We could actually do something with that. So I would just say, let's be imaginative. Let's encourage the vision. Let's really build something that Basingstoke can be really proud of.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bowden.
I was going to also attempt to go, when I say leisure park, I mean leisure park. So when you say, I'm not talking about the bits that are leisure on the park at the moment. We mean everything that is surrounded and is inside the leisure park. You know, that includes conversations with milestones, etc., etc. And all I want to characterise, to give you the answers, Steve, if I may, is Hampshire Cultural Trust are incredibly excited about the opportunity doing improvements on the leisure park bring. Because, as we all know, the Milestones Museum is this wonderful asset for the county and the region, not only our borough, and actually how you integrate that into everything else that can go on there. Because, you know, I'm passionate about active leisure. Well, Milestones is brilliant at active heritage.
I was just going to give that sort of reassurance that I speak to Hampshire Cultural Trust regularly, and in fact had a briefing meeting with them on this last week. So
Sorry, I didn't get the impression from the terms of reference for the study that actually it did embrace that area. So I'm grateful that you clarified that point for me. Thank you very much.
Councillor Mackay.
No.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, sorry, I've written you down. Councillor Compton-Burnett, then.
Thank you. Just picking up on something that Councillor Bound said just now, can I therefore take it that the golf centre is included in the discussions?
Oh, you've gone into dangerous territory now, haven't you? What is or isn't the leisure park? What is or isn't the golf centre? I think there's a reality, isn't that says, by pure definition, however other people might define it, the golf centre is not in the leisure park. But I think there's a reality about what are some of the lessons that we need to learn, that you can't look at the leisure park without looking at its relationship to everything else, whether that's in the town centre, whether that's what's next door to it, whether that's the communities that are under the underpasses, etc. So you have to look at it in its entirety. So, you know, this item is looking clearly at the stakeholder engagement and the engagement we've had with residents. But there's a reality when we talk about the master plan, isn't it? We have to think about all of those great things that we were talking about that says, how do we make sure that we get the maximum benefit from whatever happens in the leisure park in the future? And we need to exercise all of our brains with that.
Well, Councillor Compton-Burnett, and then I'll go back to Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Sorry, it's a different question. Just looking at the stakeholder engagement, can I just check about two things? The first was what stakeholder engagement was there with the NHS? And the second question was, were there workshops? Because I remember with the town centre strategy, Councillor Hunt organised an excellent workshop with the councillors, and it was really helpful. And I'm hoping that similar workshops with different stakeholders have either taken place or are planned. And I'd just like to know, please.
Just the first point about the NHS, they weren't identified specifically as a stakeholder for this piece of engagement. We engage with them on all sorts of other initiatives, including the town centre, but clearly we understand that there's the connection between health, wellbeing and what happens on the leisure park. So we'll make sure that they are involved as the plans evolve. And in terms of engagement with members, we have set up a board for the town centre, so all of the sort of consultants come in and brief to that. Obviously we come to CEP and we'll go to EPH.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much. Am I right in understanding in relation to the development of the master plan that actually the proposal is for incremental development in relation to that rather than all at once, or has that not been decided?
That is the intention, and that was the premise of the engagement, that we anticipated that it would be incremental development.
Councillor Lee.
One final question from me is around also on the stakeholder engagement. On page 40, it talks about the ice rink stakeholders have suggested using or establishing a tenant committee to influence how the park is run. Has the council looked at taking that suggestion forward? Bringing those internal stakeholders together to work and drive improvements within their remit?
The park is already sort of managed through a service charge, so the property services team are responsible for the asset management of the leisure park asset. So I think the intention is that that forum would continue.
Lovely. I've already written down a few comments already, which won't surprise you, which includes Councillor Mackay's request, slightly expanded by Councillor Lee, concerns raised around response rates, and the suggestion to work with HCC and HCT slightly further to look at developing the use of milestones and the surrounding land, although that is already happening. Does anybody else have any further comments they'd like to add? Councillor Compton-Bennett.
Thank you. My first comment just goes back to my question, in that I think it's a shame that we haven't run any workshops with councillors or other stakeholders, because I think that the workshop that Councillor Hunt ran for the town centre with the councillors was really useful. And I think given the thinking that there's been at this committee this evening, it sounds like it would be a worthwhile activity. My second comment is that there is some fantastic feedback here about the leisure park that we are using to design the future, but also we could use a lot of it now. And something I was struck by was the comments about the open space. That a lot of people didn't know there was open space around the aquadrome. People didn't really understand that it was connected to the golf centre. A third of people, or 2/3 of people, said that they would stay longer and go more often if there were outdoor activities, free activities, more open space for picnics, etc. So I think it would be really helpful if we fed all of... I know that the BD Leisure's already seen it, but I think it would be really helpful if we asked them to create a plan ask the aquadrome to create a plan for making that connectivity happen in the short term, particularly given the flumes are closed. We need to attract as many people there and give them as much to do as possible over the summer holidays. And it would be great to see what they're going to do to make the most of this connected facility with lots of open space.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Lee.
So I think it really goes towards the kind of engagement within the process, and whether the council we can look at better ways of driving that engagement within our processes that we take, consultations that we take, because I don't think this is the first time that we've had low engagement within a consultation. You know, like Councillor Amalemni, sorry, I apologise, the first time for me, has said, you know, we have got a large resident base and only a small proportion are engaging with that. What can we do to change that and flip it on its head? I think that's a wider piece.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, just to give it some context, we had a similar sort of response rate to the town centre strategy, and I think it's fairly consistent with the sort of response that we get to local plan initiatives. So I think just sort of caution about categorising it as low. It's not. It's actually quite good and consistent what we see with other engagement that the council does.
I mean, it may be consistent and in line with the whatever, you know, the other engagements, but that's still low in comparison to everything else. Right, considering the numbers.
I think I just need to be clear about what we're doing as far as calibrating that. The people that did our town centres said they hadn't seen the number of consultations like it from any of the other places they'd done it. So I think we just have to be really careful. We can do this, the pure statistical, it's relatively low, but there's also a reality that says within projects like this, how do we calibrate it as, is it high, medium or low? And we have the added difficulty of, are we trying to pigeonhole ice rink users as something that they're not? But actually, let's just face facts. It's a good high number. It's not supposed to be statistically sound. It's supposed to be a representative of the people that are interested as stakeholders. And just to pick up on another point, Councillor Compton-Burnett, you were talking about the town centre workshops that were run for councillors. That was actually at a much further down the road stage. So that's not to say it won't happen, but actually it wasn't at this point.
I think just one other thing to add, that we were operating in a time of COVID restrictions. So this had to be done online. So we would normally have more sort of town hall events. We just couldn't do that.
Thank you both. Right, no more hands. So I will just repeat for Julia in a minute. Concerns have been raised about response rates, and that actually has been highlighted as a potential council issue, although it is good within the context, probably. Committee do request consideration of wider use in the leisure park, including potentially a centre of excellence for sport, a multi-use space or a stadium, to be included in future considerations. Further work with Hampshire Cultural Trust and Hampshire County Council about developing the use of milestones, which is already underway. As the project progresses, councillor workshops are requested so that we can have further information. And also there is a suggestion that actually there's useful feedback that we could be used now, particularly for things like picnic spaces and kind of connectivity and greening it up a little bit, which would benefit residents for this summer, potentially. Have I missed anything? No? Lovely. Right, thank you very much. Brilliant. That takes us to our last agenda item, which is our work programme. Now, I have to say it's looking a little bit sparse at the moment, which for new members is relatively normal for this time of year. We are probably expecting a few more things back, but the best way to get items on the agenda is to fill in a committee work programme request, and I can email that round to you. Now that can be done at any point in the year. The form's fairly basic. It just means that you kind of sort of make sure you're really clear on what you're asking officers to do and things to be thought through and the impact of what you're hoping from that work. And democratic services can help. So if you've sort of filled it out and you've never done one before and everyone in your group's busy, then by all means ping it to them and they can also have a look. There is a meeting with all committee heads, chairs and cabinet on Monday evening. So if you've got a really good burning idea, which I know one member has, because she's already mentioned it this evening, then if you can at all get it to Democratic Services before Monday, that would be great, because then it can be considered. Councillor Lee.
Does the same apply if we're asking for kind of reports back on certain subjects that have already come forward? So as an example, the ice rink, obviously we heard that the news that they are going to engage and do some work to repair that, but are we able to request a report sort of within a period of time to say where we're at with that update, with those changes?
So I think the expectation for items like that is they'd be contained within councillor briefings, because they're more general updates rather than kind of something meaty for committee to discuss. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
I do know Councillor Compton-Bennett has suggested some things that she's expecting to come back to committee based on things that have been said previously. So I will just run through those quickly, if I can find them. Right, so some of these I have to say, so part of the work we're doing on Monday is to kind of do a bit of a sense check on what's going where, as in what items are going to what committees and making sure it's at the best fit for each committee. So some things that have said they might come back to CEP actually might end up going to EPH, for example, because we're sort of tidying things up. So town centre strategy might be one of those things, might not, but we will confirm on Monday. Cultural strategy and the revised strengthening community strategy. That was suggested that it would come back. The strengthening community grant scheme, which was brought to us 16th of March, so that was at the last meeting. We will check that. I'll bring this to the meeting. And then community assets and needs assessment and local recreational needs assessment and leisure and community centres reviews. So they, again, may come to us, may come to EPH. And the built sports facility and playing pitch strategies as well. Perfect. But I will follow those up at the meeting. And if you need to fill out a committee programme request, I will tell you. So that's fine. Are there any other questions on that? Councillor Compton Bennett.
Yes, please. Could we possibly have a work programme item? And the reason I'm asking now is because it might be completely impossible, but it's brilliant to hear that there's going to be a best fit discussion on Monday. And what would be fantastic, if it's possible, would be if we could then have a work programme item that shows us what are all the plans and strategies within the scope of this committee and what they contain, how they link with each other, what date they were authored, when they're going to be updated. Just because at the moment there are lots of different things, but I don't know how they fit together and I don't know where there are gaps and overlaps, and it would be fantastic to understand how it all works.
Sue Curden's going to explain it all to you.
Yeah, because we're going to be here for ages. No, so interestingly, we are trying to do a piece of work because there are an awful lot of strategies, an awful lot of policies, an awful lot of procedures. So we are trying to look at what do we actually have, which ones of them, for example, what's the governance route in terms of approval, how do they link across? So a lot of our documents now do have diagrams in them that say, here's all the strategies and here's how they all link. But again, they're slightly segmented still. So there is a piece of work, but it's going to take some time for us to collate all of that. So if there's something very specific that you want us to try and explain, that would be absolutely fine. But I think it's a massive piece of work, because part of that as well is that actually, do we really need that many strategies, policies, etc.? Is there a more collegiate way of actually doing it? So we're trying to capture it all. But there are already some diagrams that actually, sort of show some of what we would, I guess as officers, we would class as the key strategies that, we as officers operate within, that you as members have actually you've approved those strategies, that's what we work to. So we do have those. So we've got, I can probably just ping around as part of the information that's coming around, one of the key ones that we use at the moment. Well, hopefully you can see how they all link across. But I guess what you're getting more of is the granular detail in terms of, it's interesting, isn't it, that the conversation we had about the leisure park then clearly has some indications for the health and wellbeing strategy. So it's, are we all cognizant of where all those lines are? So we are trying to kind of pull all that information together, but it's certainly something that's really important that we do.
So she will explain it all, just not right now. Councillor Tuck.
So it's just to mention for members that the bit that I was going to put in a request for was obviously on green infrastructure strategy and the going through the deliverables on that document. If there was anything you wanted me to add in, please do contact me.
Thank you. Right. In which case, there are no further items on the agenda. We don't have to exclude the press or public. So thank you very much. Thank you for contributing so helpfully and positively to our first meeting back. And as I said at the beginning of the meeting, I look forward to working with you all in the coming year. Thank you.